Hello and welcome to the SIG webinar series. My name is Amanda Gunter. I'm Director of Global Membership with SIG, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar. We have the 7 keys to better sourcing and supplier relationships. Really looking forward to this presentation, but before we begin, I just want to go over a few SIG programs with you. The Member Rewards Program. So you are automatically signed up for this whenever you participate in anything SIG related. And if you're anything like me, you're very competitive, so this is a way that we track how involved you are, and we'll have some great rewards for everyone. More information coming soon on our SIG.org website. The SIG webinar series happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It is free and open to the public, so we encourage you to go to our website. You can see some of those upcoming titles, and there are some abstracts for those webinars on our website at SIG.org. So register for that webinar. You will receive a link to the recording and a PDF of the deck just by registering. Member Town Hall teleconferences. These are called town halls because we really want the attendees to speak up and be active in the conversation. It is buy-side only attendance, and it is not recorded. There are various topics. But May 14th, we have Carol Britton, who's the CPO from Bank of New York Mellon. She will be facilitating the topic of data visualization using dynamic dashboards. So that's coming up. You can find out more information. Again, everything is at SIG.org. Our global summit. We just wrapped up our summit at the beginning of the month in Nashville. It was fantastic. There were over 50 breakout sessions, 3 solid days of networking. If the attendees didn't walk away with a stack of business cards, then they were not engaged enough, because there were plenty of people who did. Feedback was wonderful. We had just almost 70% represented by the buy side, and very executive level. You can see some of the companies that were in attendance there. Our next summit is coming up in Denver, Colorado, October 14th to the 16th at the Omni Denver. You can see a high-level agenda on our website at SIG.org. We also bring SIG close to cities near you with our symposiums and our regional roundtables. Now, with these events, we have over 98% of the attendees responding that they found great value from these days. So we know we're doing something right. We encourage you to register for these events. Join us for a day of sharing best practices, learning from one another, and networking, getting a pocket full of peers. So symposiums are longer days. They're from 8 in the morning until 6 at night. Our regional roundtables are a bit shorter, smaller, more intimate, but both are packed with information, keynote speakers, roundtable discussions, things like that. You can see some of the cities coming up, and you can view the agendas at SIG.org. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome you to 7 keys for better sourcing and supplier relationships. As you know, you should have sound right now coming out of the speakers on your computer. If not, you can request the dial-in number, but you may need to turn up the speakers on your computer. We have a Q&A section. We welcome you to post your questions in there, and I will interject as possible throughout the presentation, but we do want to keep this interactive. If we can't get to everyone's questions, no problem. I'm sure our presenters will follow up with everyone after the webinar as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Richard Waugh. He's the Vice President, Corporate Development with Zycus. He started his career as Marketing and Finance Manager with GE. Over the years, he's really evolved into a business leader and entrepreneur where he's helped launch the first online marketplace for sourcing and procurement, as well as co-founding one of the first software-as-a-service sourcing suite providers. With regards to supply management, Richard leveraged his years of knowledge and experience, worked with Aberdeen Group as an industry analyst. Joining him today, we have Andrew Bartolini, Managing Partner and Chief Research Officer with Ardent Partners. He's globally recognized expert in sourcing, procurement, accounts payable, and supply management. At Ardent Partners, Andrew focuses his research and efforts on helping enterprises develop and execute strategies to achieve operational excellence within their procurement and finance department. So welcome, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Amanda. And as the sponsoring organization, Zycus, I'd like to kind of set the stage just quickly here today, give you a sense for where we fit in the mix here. Zycus is an integrated suite provider that covers the full source-to-pay process. So we look at this as a continuum, an ongoing process that leverages these 7 keys that we'll be talking about for better sourcing and supplier relationships. And an integrated approach to sourcing and procurement for us involves starting with spend analytics. So, for instance, not to steal too much of your thunder, Andrew, but the first, really the first key will be knowing your spend. So that's a logical starting point in many cases. Then going through a rigorous sourcing methodology and category management process to arrive at the best supply relationships and manage those through the contract management, supplier performance measurement, and supplier information management processes, all the way through operational procurement with procure to pay, and then really capturing and documenting the results that are yielded as a result of this process in the form of financial savings management. So to briefly highlight for you the agenda we have today, first I want to set the stage, a little bit of an introduction why we're so focused on sourcing, what we're hearing from the marketplace that indicates this is a top initiative for many of your organizations. And Andrew will then help us really understand that more clearly in terms of how that integrates in with the overall CPO's agenda. And then the core of our content today, going through those 7 keys and really how you can help leverage that information, those keys, to maximize the results in your own organizations. One of the things we did at Zycus was, first of all, try to take the pulse of the marketplace out there, and hence our study that we've just published is called The Pulse of Procurement for 2014. And this is a market analysis that we first conducted back in 2012. So one of the interesting findings here is how things are changing, what the trends are from a couple years back to the current state. And one of the things that it highlighted for us was this focus on sourcing, so technology-enabled sourcing in particular, or e-sourcing. And what we found from our survey results that polled over 300 respondents globally is that 75%, a little bit better than 75%, either already have made an investment in an e-sourcing technology or plan to do so in the coming 12 months. And that total was up fully 11% from the 2012, so it's clearly an area that's a top focus. And there's a clear reason for that. There was a direct correlation that we found in our study between those that had made those investments that are focused on e-sourcing and their ability to generate cumulative savings. So the folks that were in our top tier, our top savings bracket, if you will, were 2.5 times more likely to be using an e-sourcing solution than those that hadn't achieved the same level of savings. And of course, we like to corroborate some of those findings with other benchmark results and efforts and so on. So here's some data from the Hackett Group that really mirrors what we found. If you look at the top investment plans across the spectrum of sourcing and procurement activities, strategic sourcing and category management, which really underpins those sourcing efforts, rose to the top very quickly as the top initiatives. So that's really just to set the stage today why we think it's so important to focus on better sourcing. We see that the market is focused there. So we really want to share and leverage best practices to achieve those better results. Andrew.
Great. Thanks, Richard. First, let me start by saying I'm a little under the weather today, so I apologize if I get a little raspy at some point. But thanks first, Amanda and Richard, for inviting me here today to present and talk about the 7 keys that drive better sourcing and supplier management. My firm, Ardent Partners, also does market research on procurement and supply management and sourcing, and I'm going to start off with a little taste of our annual research report, a little taste from some of the research. It really focuses on the experience, the performance, perspective, and intentions of chief procurement officers and other executives, and draws from 273 professionals. As part of that process, I interviewed about 25 different CPOs in various industries and various geographies, and I really always like to start our reports and many presentations with some of the comments of leaders in the field, and Steve Murphy is certainly one of those. He's taken over the helm of an organization that's going through some massively exciting change and dramatic growth in an industry of oil and energy that really has really just spiked north, right? Just a very fast-moving organization, and as he sees it, right, the opportunities for procurement to influence business decisions and to influence business results and to truly make an impact on this upward trajectory of this fast-moving company, really are unlimited. And that's really the exciting, it's very gratifying, and I get very excited when I hear executives who have worked in the industry and are, have worked in the industry for as long as Steve has and are in the role, of leaders of large organizations, that they're still excited by the opportunities that sit in front of the procurement profession, that sit in front of sourcing professionals. And we've really come a long way over the past 10 or 15 years, or really the time that I started in this industry. But there's still a lot of work to do, right? And so what we see here was the question of, how is the CPO, the Chief Procurement Officer, viewed internally within your organization, right? And so what we see here is, 43% are viewed favorably, right? I would say quite favorably, right? So, when you look at the goal of procurement, it's not, to command and control decisions. It's to really guide and influence and steward the stakeholders to make the best decisions possible. It's to steward and drive suppliers to create and bring value and to drive innovation and to bring the best opportunities back that they present to you back into your organization. And so we see that 43% are viewed quite well, right? So top collaborators or significant influencers. We see about another third of the market that is doing okay, right? They're not shooting the lights out. They're doing kind of what they should be doing, albeit not in spectacular fashion. And this is the group that has, real potential to begin to take strides, to begin to build a path towards best-in-class performance. And then we have another group, call it, 27%, right? We'll throw the siloed in with the reactive. This is the group that is really just struggling for engagement with the business, struggling for attention, struggling for budget, and really when they're engaged, they're playing off their hind legs, right? They're not driving forward. They're not where they want to be. And so, that organization, simply by doing some basic blocking and tackling, standardizing processes, automating some processes, setting some policies, and getting some executive sponsorship can really begin to drive tremendous value. So lots of opportunities, really for all organizations. Now, when we look at what are the things that are on the CPO's agenda in 2014, I think that, everyone who's worked in procurement for, really since the global recession, 2008, 2009, the tough times, has really felt, the impact of operating in what many call the new normal economy. Where doing more with less is, has no longer become sort of a temporary state. It is the permanent state. Everyone understands, everyone within procurement, right? Even those procurement organizations that are performing very, very well find it very difficult to get new headcount. Organizations are, despite some very strong performance from procurement organizations, enterprises in general are still hesitant to make very large and significant investments in procurement. And so that leaves the CPO not left to do more with less, but really trying to do better with the same. And when we look at the top strategies that CPOs have for 2014, what they're really trying to do is optimize what they have today. They're trying to improve their technology usage. They're trying to improve relationships that they have both internally and externally. Now, 2013 was, a great year for investors, and 2013 was was a very good year for procurement professionals, but it wasn't too long ago, just 5 years ago last month, that I had a conversation with Christina DeLuca, a CPO at British Petroleum, and really, it was a completely different market. It was a completely different time. And what was required for most procurement organizations at that time was for them to really step up and react and execute at the time when enterprises needed them most, right? When you looked back at what CEOs and CFOs were talking about from a public company perspective and from a forward-looking perspective, a lot of the success that they were focused on driving and communicating to the market was going to be driven by CPOs. And by and large, CPOs and procurement departments and sourcing professionals delivered. And, we've seen some great benefits from that. We've seen some great momentum in the profession. We fast forward to this year, and Chris Shanahan, a CPO at BD, I think really hits upon, one of the risks that we now have, right? I think 2012 was a very good and stable year. 2013, very strong year, right? Not a lot of volatility. Procurement organizations, by and large, hitting their numbers. Lots of sourcing activity, lots of successful activity. But the challenge is that, or the risk or the concern is to not become complacent. And, we really think that, I really think that, one of the ways that we avoid becoming complacent is that we stay sharp in our sourcing. And that's, really what we're here to talk about today. It's the 7 keys, or really 7 keys, because there's certainly more than just 7 keys that can really drive or lead to better sourcing and can lead to better supplier relationships. And so let's dive in, right? And so, yes, Richard, you stole my thunder. Key number 1, know your spend, right? Procurement as an industry and as a profession has come very far, right? We have now a chief procurement officer, a C-level executive in procurement departments in about 85 to almost 90% of procurement departments. Even if not by title, we have an executive single point of contact with ownership and oversight of a professional procurement organization. Now, I guess I'm still surprised that here we are in 2014 at the high percentage of enterprises that still lack visibility into spend, right? And I think that, a procurement department cannot claim to be a strategic function if it doesn't understand its spend, what it's buying, who it's buying from, at what terms, and at what cadence, right? I mean, just like you would expect a sales group that doesn't track a sales pipeline, or an accounting team that doesn't understand SEC reporting requirements. You would look at those organizations as functionally inept. For procurement organizations, the path to best-in-class performance, the foundation of operational excellence really lies in spend visibility. Right now, spend visibility into spend alone is not the sole answer. Right, you have to be able to take action upon it. But when you have the insight and ability to take action upon spend visibility, you're able to make informed decisions. You're able to identify opportunities. You're able to better allocate your resources, and you're better able to engage with the business, right? So if you're an organization that's, procurement organizations today manage 60% of their spend on average, right? So there's 40% of spend that sourcing teams and procurement teams have no control or influence over. To go out and engage that group without understanding what their spend is, really puts you behind the 8 ball in trying to engage that organization. Now, Richard, you sort of stole my thunder with knowing your spend, but I think you've got some comments and thoughts here on this key.
I do, Andrew. I think the corollary to knowing the spend, then, the next step is know where to look for savings. And, really the power of the spend analysis and the analytical data is to be able to then mine that data for meaningful patterns that can become actionable, that can drive savings opportunities. So an example here is sort of bubbling up across various categories of spend, natural kind of buckets that dictate different savings opportunities and sourcing strategies. So that might include looking at categories where the spend data tells us that there's an opportunity to rationalize the supply base, that the spend is simply fragmented across too many suppliers. Likewise, when it comes to demand, there may be an opportunity to manage that demand on the front end, to control spending before it happens. But where it does happen, to aggregate the demand more effectively, because you now have a granular view to exactly what's being purchased and by whom across the organization. Just a couple of other quick examples that can easily be highlighted by being able to mine that spend data include something as simple as payment term rationalization, where you can highlight deviations from the standard terms that you expected to be in your contracts, and really being able to manage cash flow more effectively. And then finally, the whole area of compliance, so contract compliance is shown here, and really measuring compliance across a couple of dimensions. One is within your own organization, using that insights into spending to highlight where maverick purchasing may be occurring. So, users buying from other than your approved contracted vendors. Or on the flip side, compliance from the supply base. So, believe it or not, organizations finding incidences where the same part from the same supplier may be purchased at vastly different prices. So purchase price variance at an item level, where the granularity that the spend analytics provide really can highlight those kinds of savings opportunities. Andrew?
Yeah, no, that's great. So, right, so know your spend, know where to look for savings, and that's going to bring us to our first poll question, which I think they're going to present to you now. Amanda?
Yes, if you just move to the next slide.
Okay, great. Okay, so the question is, how often is the procurement function engaged in the sourcing process up front before a supplier has been selected? Almost always, often, sometimes, or never. And so, all right. So here's
Great,
the poll.
thank you.
So we're going. Yep. So we're going to give you a few seconds to consider, right? So when do you get engaged in the sourcing process, right? Is it at the front end when they're starting to talk about requirements, or is it at the back end when they say we need something and we need to know it at this deadline, at this time frame? So we're going to let it run for a few more seconds.
I'm sure it can vary depending on the department that you're dealing with too, but if we ask people just to generalize.
Right. So on average.
And I'm curious, before the poll ends, which do you feel is going to be the most common?
I mean, if I were to guess, I would say sometimes, or often. And so, do I click forward here?
Nope, we're just
calibrating
those results, and they'll pop up in just a few seconds.
Okay.
This is where we want technology to be as quick as our brains. There we go.
All right, there you go. So what we see here, right, so I believe everybody can see this, and Richard, feel free to weigh in, right? So the lead response coming in at 42% is sometimes. So sometimes procurement or the sourcing team is not an order taker. Second is that often, at 32%, the sourcing team is engaged before a supplier has been selected. What we like to see is that 25%, so 1 in 4 of the folks on the call, are engaged up front, and that leads right to key number 2, which is the value of when procurement, or really when procurement is engaged in the sourcing process matters, right? I had to reach back into my bag of tricks and go back to a case study that was done by the now defunct Purchasing Magazine back in probably like 2005 or 2006. But I'll explain the chart, and then we'll talk about the value that we see in getting engaged sooner, right? So this is an analysis that was done by Bristol Myers Squibb of approximately 100 sourcing projects. And a determination, if you're to go across the bottom of the chevrons there, is really looking at the Bristol Myers Squibb sourcing process, right? So profile the category, develop a sourcing strategy, all the way through to selecting the supplier and implementing, and then, really managing supplier continuous improvement. The black line that is angled from the top down shows the different levels of savings that were achieved based on the time frame within which sourcing was engaged in the project. And so this was all done within similar categories, so there was some set of controls. You see the supplier selection line, and what you see is this downward tilt, right? So when procurement is engaged sooner, and so, before I was an analyst, I was a strategic sourcing professional, and I've managed sourcing projects that totaled more than $500 million on the direct side and on the indirect side. And coming in as a consultant as I did, I was often, coming in on the front end, right? So I wasn't really stuck too often coming in post-supplier selection or too close to that line, right? They were paying for my time and for our services. So we were engaged up front. But the opportunity to add value at the front end is absolutely tremendous for sourcing professionals. Everybody on the call understands that, right? The challenge is, how do you get engaged sooner? What are the strategies that you can do to communicate to the budget holders, the business stakeholders, the people that have the requirements and the needs, that your team is there and able to support what they're trying to achieve, right? So the strategies can range from embedding sourcing staff into specific departments and really, putting them out as satellites within business units or within department functions to get engaged and to get and develop personal and professional relationships and a level of trust and communication so that the sourcing team can understand what needs are coming down the pike and then react and respond appropriately to them. I think, the chart explains this, this very, very well visually, and I think it's, it makes the perfect case, and it's great to have a quantified example here where, the savings ranges from, 10 to 18% down to 5 to 0%. Business stakeholders have the budget. They know what they want. In some cases, they kind of know what they want. There's a real opportunity here to come in and add some rigor to the process. And, of course, everyone who's in the SIG organization knows the value that a sourcing professional can bring to an opportunity like this. So key number 2, engage sooner. One of the benefits of that early engagement is the ability to go in and really shape and rationalize end-user specifications, right? Better understanding of the business need and use allows for opportunities for procurement or the sourcing team and the sourcing professionals to add value to the process, right? If they understand the business need and the use, and there's some time that allows them to investigate the market, perhaps send out an RFI to the suppliers, and get their feedback as to what are the current trends and what are the new ways what are the new ways or approaches that are being adopted as it relates to a specific item or service. I think, in this example, right, let's look at the good old Osborne 1, right? I'm sure all of you are very familiar with this great cutting edge computer. But as you look at the specifications here, right, if procurement was involved in this, and I'm obviously using this as a hopefully somewhat humorous example of specifications, right? You can ask the questions, right? Do the users really need a leather handle for the Osborne 1? Wouldn't a hard vinyl or hard plastic handle suffice? It says here that the minimum operating ambient air temperature is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, our staff doesn't work in freezing temperatures, right? Is getting an Osborne 1 that works at 50 degrees Fahrenheit sufficient or satisfactory, right? It's getting involved, during the thought process and understanding what's the business use and what's the outcome that's desired that allows the sourcing professionals to come in and rationalize specs. That doesn't mean, necessarily ramping them down, right? You may find that they're underspec for what's happening in the market or the new innovations, and getting the engagement and the discussion ahead of time so that you're not just stuck with some sort of very short-term deadline that really constrains your ability to utilize your expertise and skills. So key number 3, tighter specifications. And so, Richard, I know you and Zycus have done some work in this area and have a case study I think you want to present.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, and in fact, I think this case study at this point would really kind of highlight the importance in practice of applying really the first 3 keys that we've walked through here, knowing your spend, engaging sooner, and tightening up those specifications. So in this example, a specific category example for IT staff augmentation, this is a global pharma company that really put these keys into practice. So in step 1, a rigorous spend analysis revealed that for a fairly significant spend category, $35 million in total, that spend was way too fragmented across 40 suppliers. But before you could go to market effectively and really tap into the savings potential, tightening the specification as well as getting engaged sooner from a procurement standpoint were critical keys as well. So for instance, being able to standardize job classes, being able to define exactly what a Java programmer 1 has in terms of skills and experience versus Java programmer 2, and so on and so forth. And then having done that, going to market through a sourcing approach, actually a multi-stage process, starting with the request for information, proposal, and actually having normalized a lot of the different factors of quality and cost, being able to then get to the price component through an auction. So a multi-stage integrated process that yielded the results first of rationalizing the supply base, going from 40 to 8, but generating significant savings, in this case, dramatic improvement, 35% savings, much more control over who are the strategic suppliers for that particular spend category, and much higher compliance as a result. So just a good example of where those keys really come into play in a specific category sourcing example.
Right. No, that's a great example, and this is a category that, if it hasn't been sourced in recent times, it usually provides a huge opportunity for consolidation, just based upon how it's how an organization's how an enterprise's contingent workforce is managed, and we see this specific category is a huge area of growth. We expect this to rise by 30% over the next 3 years. Now, one of the things that I'm sure the folks in this case study did was that they utilized better upfront communication, and that's key number 4 to better sourcing and supplier management. Right there, there's this dirty little secret that exists that some buyers and some sourcing professionals want some suppliers to participate in their bid or in their e-sourcing event, as the case may be. In some scenarios, buyers have already predetermined who they'd like to work with, and generally it's the incumbent. And what they're trying to do is get a few other suppliers in so that they can check a box and make their award as they see fit. We don't think that that's necessarily the right strategy. We know that exists. We think that one way to eliminate that is to get the communication standardized and really centralized, and to do a much better job in supplier communication up front, right? Markets are moving so fast that your incumbent or that favored supplier may not be the highest valued supplier for very long, right? You can look at the consumer electronics market as probably the most visible example of market leadership changing within a period of 3 and 5 years, and market leaders absolutely just disappearing from the market as innovation and competition really is, driving such dramatic shifts in consumer electronics markets. The same thing is happening in all supply markets. It may not be as visible, it may not be as fast, but it's happening. And so we need to make sure, sourcing leaders need to make sure that their teams are engaging in the full opportunity, right? If they're going to go through a sourcing process, that they're fairly engaging the best potential qualified bidders, qualified suppliers in a process. And so we think that, clear and upfront communication levels the playing field and really does draw in the suppliers who you ultimately will want to do business with, right? I think that, one of the major reasons why sourcing professionals are less excited, those sourcing professionals that are less excited about using e-sourcing tools is because of their the quality of their RFPs, and it's much easier to not rewrite something and send something out. But, it's really, the RFP is a very important document, whether it's delivered by email or by mail. Hopefully you're delivering it electronically. But, in my experience, the RFP process can break down because they're just poorly structured and they're poorly written. And what needs to happen is you need to be able to communicate in simple language what it is that you want, what's the time frame that you want it, what you're looking to do, when and where, how much do you want, and, how are you going to evaluate the bid, right? And, when you look at sourcing professionals who are using the same RFP that they used, 10, 15 years ago with slight updates, a lot of that information is not captured up front, and it makes it very hard for suppliers to understand what the opportunity is, understand the value, understand the potential, and then put resources behind it, right? When there's a lack of clarity, there's likely to be a lack of investment and attention. And so we think that, sourcing teams everywhere, if they can standardize their communication, if they can put out the time frames, and if they can just get, key milestones and very standardized language in how we go to market with our RFPs, that there's just extraordinary benefit to standardizing that process and to being clear in how you engage and communicate with your suppliers. Now, Richard, I think you've got a similar thought here and similar slide, so maybe I stole your thunder this time.
Oh, no worries, Andrew. I think the storm is brewing and the thunder clouds are coming together, and that's, building consensus is really what this is all about, to bringing these groups together. I think we see sourcing as fundamentally a collaborative process that has to engage multiple stakeholders across the organization. It tends to culminate, in an actual negotiation event, but I think the takeaway is that that collaboration, that consensus has to happen well before the day of the event, of the main event or the big event, to make sure that all of these questions, kind of the 5 W's and 1 H, if you will, have been addressed. So some practical considerations as regards the actual sourcing event is, how do you want to conduct it? Will it be a multi-round event, for example, that starts with a request for information to identify potentially qualified suppliers, goes through potentially multiple rounds of RFQs or RFPs, could even include an auction round at the end to really focus on price. So determining how to go about it, which type is most appropriate, and also who will participate. Who are those critical internal stakeholders that need to be part of the process, that need to be engaged in kind of analyzing and scoring the supplier bid responses, both on technical or qualitative aspects as well as the cost components, and who are those suppliers? In addition, as Andrew, as you just mentioned, to the incumbents that you want to be part of it, do you want to introduce new suppliers to the mix to get a more liquid market and drive more towards a market price? And, also equally important to establish up front, why are we doing this? What are the tangible goals, perhaps both in terms of savings or other quality and delivery concerns that we want to accomplish as a result of the sourcing project? And then sort of logistical concerns come into play as well. When will it be scheduled? How long do we want it to occur? And, of course, where will it take place? Well, when we're talking e-sourcing, it's taking place in the cloud. Bringing those folks together in an online type of negotiating environment. And, just some benchmark metrics that we've seen across our own customer base from a usage standpoint. One of the interesting things that you find is when we first started talking about e-sourcing several years ago, there was so much hype about the actual auction event. And one of the interesting results is that over time, the auction has kind of found its place in the arsenal of tools, that it really fits for particular categories. It's a very effective tool where it makes sense, but it's not the panacea or the silver bullet by any stretch. In fact, as we look at the usage of e-sourcing tools, it's clearly predominantly an RFP or an RFQ type process, so about 2/3 of the time, and often will be preceded by an RFI stage here with about 23%, and auction is about 12% of the actual event type volume. So it fits, but it's part of an overall concerted effort. And the results, they speak for themselves. On average across the customer base, 12% savings on a per category negotiation, and cycle time reduction on the order of 17% as well.
Yeah, so impressive numbers, right? And driven by technology and driven by clear communication, right? So one of the things that we think you should communicate upfront to your suppliers or to your to the bidders in your RFX, your RFP, your RFI, whatever the case may be, is how you're going to evaluate them, right? What is the evaluation criteria, and what's the time frame for performing it, right? So one of the great things about procurement in the profession and that we've seen in recent years is that it really is drawing professionals from other walks of life into it, right? Because it is an exciting place that does have, like Steve Murphy says, unlimited opportunities and potential to drive value. And so some of you on the phone may actually have spent some time in sales roles, right? And for those of you that haven't, right, so Ardent Partners, we occasionally get called in to bid on a custom benchmarking project or some other type of advisory project. And one of the most frustrating things from a sales perspective is to spend time answering and responding to an RFP, sending it in, and then sitting and waiting and checking in and saying, hey, any updates on how it's going? Trying to get a general update. Where are we with this process? We were given a deadline. We put a lot of energy and effort and resources into crafting what we believe is our best bid and our opportunity to show you that we can be your provider of greatest value, and nothing. It goes into a void. For sourcing teams who have to make a decision, who have to come up with the criteria, it's much better to have all of this set up front and to then execute a plan that was established and communicated with your suppliers at the beginning, right? To drive liquidity in a market, as Richard called it, right? You need suppliers. You need qualified suppliers. And to get them to come back next time, you need to be respectful of the time and effort that they've put in, right? A key frustration, right, is to place a bid and never hear back. And my sense is that this happens very frequently. I mean, when we talk to organizations on the sourcing side, right, they know that they don't always close the loops and they don't close them in a timely fashion, right? You want to understand, right? I mean, it's very frustrating to focus in and hurry up and wait, right? It's absolutely something that can be avoided, right? It's work that has to be done, right? An evaluation has to occur. Give them the time frame, put it up front, and then stand by it, right? I mean, the evaluation criteria should be set beforehand. I mean, certainly you're going to get some new information along the way, right? And you don't have to be so, tightly married to whatever was predetermined, but, within the general framework, you should have an understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve, what it is you're looking for in the supply base, right? These are things that sourcing pros, the folks that are listening in today, this is the value that you can add to the process, right? Get the stakeholders back into the meeting. Get them to make the decision on the agreed upon time frame, right? You guys need it for your savings calculations, right? The sooner the savings comes in, the better your numbers look. There's just extraordinary, it's work that has to be done. Why not do it on the time frame that you've set? And so, with that, let's move to research real-time poll question number 2. And the question is, how often do you conduct face-to-face or phone negotiations at the conclusion of an online sourcing event? Is it almost always? Is it often? Is it sometimes? Is it almost never? Or all negotiations happen this way? None of the sourcing process is online today. Right? And so we're going to open up the poll. We've got, about 30 seconds here, right? But, really, when you think about it, what? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a clarification.
No.
On the last 2 slides ago, when you showed the reduction in cycle time, was that referring to the time it takes to plan and complete a sourcing event? Or were you talking about the reduction in the product lead time from suppliers?
Oh, yeah, great question. This is Richard. I can address that. It's really the former. It's the time to, the entire cycle time to plan and conduct the sourcing project, the sourcing event.
Great, thank you. And the poll has closed. We're just going to calculate those responses and put them up on the screen in just a moment. I have another question for you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, right, I mean, the question's really getting at, part of the, key number 5 there about, efficient evaluations, right? I mean, do you have suppliers come in and bid in an auction and have them think that they've, placed the highest bid and you haven't told them that, that's round 1 and round 2 is actually a series of in-person or phone negotiations, right? I mean, this is about getting better communication up front, being clearer, and then executing on your plan, right? If the auction is just the first stage, let them know that, right? It's how you're going to keep them engaged. It's how you're going to keep your markets liquid. And so what we see here with results, right? So, pretty tight band here, right? Almost always, often, sometimes, and all negotiations happen this way are all around 20%, right? There is no clear winner here. So it seems like it's, more of an ad hoc type of situation, right? And maybe it's category driven or maybe it's stakeholder driven. Richard, I don't know if you care to comment or you just want to dive into, sort of your view on effective evaluations and the ability to do it online and off.
Well, I do appreciate the poll results, Andrew, because I think it does confirm what our suspicion was, quite frankly, because as we talk about, effective evaluations, there's no question that the online tools have really reduced the friction in the process and the coordination cost involved in engaging a broader pool of suppliers to be able to really shorten that cycle time, make that process more efficient. But quite frankly, as these tools were first introduced, one of the big areas of concern was that it would, in essence, dehumanize the process or remove the value of the relationships between the sourcing organization and the suppliers. And quite frankly, I think there was a gap in our tools and really all the tools in the market that ignored the fact that even with an effective online negotiation process, often at the end of that process, there's a need for, once you've gotten to the short list or the selected suppliers, for additional rounds of often face-to-face or still offline, phone negotiations that ended up happening outside of these tools. So to address that, we've actually added a new feature where that acknowledges that fact, that exists, that there's a need for that and there's value in it, but ultimately that you want to capture that discussion thread and document in the tool what happened in that face-to-face meeting or negotiation with a supplier. So a way to create the audit trail, to note the comments and the decisions that were part of that face-to-face negotiation, actually send for a final confirmation to the supplier the final pricing and terms that were agreed in that last and best and final round, if you will, that happened in a face-to-face meeting. So it's really looking at an effective evaluation process that acknowledges what our poll results showed, that even when the initial stages are done online, almost half the time there's still it's almost always or oftentimes followed by a face-to-face negotiation process.
Right. And that can be a positive thing from the supplier's perspective. That could be a negative thing, right? I mean, negotiations can go many different ways, and I think that leads to key number 6 here, right? So ultimately, once you've made an award, right, and you've gotten through the sourcing process, you've gotten through the negotiation process, you've gotten through the contracting process, right? I mean, some of these things can be quite belabored. They can be quite adversarial. They can be somewhat antagonistic, potentially from the supplier side, right? At the end of the day, why you've agreed to the contract is that both sides have decided that there's value in doing business together. And, we think that, as we sort of continue through this discussion, right, you notice we've taken sort of a linear view of the sourcing process, right? We're now at we've decided we're going to do business together. Now what? We think that there's a great and very a great opportunity in very simple and easy way to change the discussion if it was intense, and get the conversation and get the relationship back to where it needs to be by really warmly welcoming the supplier and onboarding them in a process that makes sense, that is cognizant of their needs and requirements, right? And so, this isn't, send flowers and balloons to all of your suppliers, right? It's not at that level. And it, certainly, how warmly and the level of time and effort that you spend engaging suppliers is going to depend on, where they sit within, sort of your supplier matrix. How strategic are they, or how tactical are they? But even the most tactical suppliers can be welcomed with a nice, simple, standardized note that is clear, that communicates that they're viewed as a partner, that they are an asset to the organization. Now not all negotiations, are confrontational and end with, hard feelings between, personalities that are then going to have a relationship over the length of that contract. Maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 5 years, right? You need to be able to take a step back and reset the conversation, and to do it in a clean and standardized way, and really, begin to engage those strategic suppliers, the suppliers that you're ultimately going to rely on in an increasing way to deliver value, to find innovation, to really help you navigate a more competitive landscape. Simple etiquette and nice manners go a very long way, and getting that sort of indoctrinated into the post-contract onboarding process, we think is a pretty simple but very effective way to drive value in the relationship. Richard?
Couldn't agree more, Andrew. And as you say, if it's a 3 to 5 year agreement that you've just negotiated, no matter how intense those negotiations are, you're entering into a long-term partnership. So rolling out the welcome mat makes all the sense in the world. And of course, from a very practical consideration standpoint, one of the best ways to welcome a new supplier is to make sure they get onboarded efficiently so that they can get paid when they send in that first invoice. That's one of the best ways to welcome them to the neighborhood, and recognize that onboarding process may involve multiple functional groups and stakeholders, just as the sourcing process did as well. So being able to capture this information as much as possible, have an integrated process so that a lot of the same information you asked for in the RFI or RFP be brought forward into the onboarding process, and then augmented with the credit and risk evaluation that the finance folks need, with any type of supplier validation that comes from the compliance office, everything you need to get that supplier onboarded and truly welcome to your community.
Great. So, let's take to key number 7 and close it out and maybe take some questions here. So, key number 7, right? So, you've welcomed your supplier. You've gone through the sourcing process, right? You've utilized the keys, and again, there are more than 7 keys better sourcing and supplier management. But this one here we think is very, very valuable, particularly as you look at the competitive landscape that most of your companies are operating in today, right? It has become a world where it's less company competing directly against other companies and really more so supply chains competing against other supply chains. Now, what I show you here is a picture of LG Electronics. It's taken from LG Electronics 2010 Global Suppliers Day, which was held in Korea in 2010. Now, I was invited to attend this event by their CPO. He's actually no longer there, but I didn't go. But I just wanted to review the agenda with you, just so you can see how some leading procurement organizations are thinking about their suppliers, not as vendors, but as assets, as partners, as sources of value and expertise, right? So the agenda began with a review of the agenda and then a discussion of their company's 2009 performance. The CPO then came and welcomed everybody and was very upfront with what they were looking to achieve, what was on his CPO's agenda in 2010, right? This is great upfront communication. They brought in a special speaker to talk about innovation and how they think as a company and what they were trying to achieve at the executive level. They then broke out into breakout sessions where each product group met with and presented in front of their suppliers with their product roadmaps, right? So very proactive, very engaging. The CEO came and spent time delivering an address, really talking about the importance of the relationships that they have and the vision of the company. They followed it up with some recognition and rewards, and then they had some fun, right? They had a dinner and some sort of charity event, and really what it did is it engaged suppliers in a way that is becoming more standard, but still not the default way, but really engaging suppliers in a proactive way, sharing with them, building trust by communicating, what business results they're focused on, what outcomes they're focused on, what are the values of the organization, and what they're trying to do. And for some executive time and some cost and investment in an event, really we're really able to charge and catalyze many of the partner relationships. As the CPO, they continue to have this type of event, and I know that the CPO is doing this at his new organization. So we think whether you are having a supplier day or not, I think the main point is, are you communicating to your strategic suppliers what it is you're trying to do, not just today, but over the next few years, and we think that that's really one of the keys to driving better supplier management and getting better results. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Richard here and let him lead this poll question.
That's great, Andrew. And this will be our final poll question. So to the point of that supplier communication and interaction, we kind of wanted to get a read from the audience out there. What's the frequency of supplier performance measurement? So, for example, that was an annual supplier day, but looking at just the various intervals or the cadence at which you're measuring supplier performance, is it A, less frequent than annual? Is it on an annual basis, B, or C, quarterly, D, monthly, or does it in fact even happen more frequently than monthly, E? So we'll give folks a minute to ponder that, but definitely seeing the results there.
Yes, and we'll leave that poll up for people, but in the interest of time, because we do like to keep these webinars within an hour, we can move on to the next slide.
Sure, absolutely. So just in thinking about this topic, again, technology is not a replacement for that very valuable kind of face-to-face interaction, like the Global Supplier Day that Andrew was mentioning, but practicalities dictate that may only be an annual event. So where technology can come into play is on an interim basis, being able to keep track and provide dashboard level visibility to what are the key trends in supplier performance on a continuous basis. so that, again, it just complements the face-to-face with the immediacy of the online and the ability, quite frankly, to take preemptive and proactive actions when performance falls short of objectives. So, for instance, implementing corrective action plans. When the scorecard stoplight metaphor indicates, it's a yellow or red situation, indicating caution or take immediate action as well. So, we can see the poll results that kind of play into this as well, that most organizations are looking at the need to track supplier performance more often than annually. Most are either quarterly or monthly, in fact. So really validates that situation. And, just to leave you with then, we wanted to make sure you were aware that there's an opportunity to get some great information about the whole topic of supplier management with this report that Ardent Partners, Andrew's organization, has published here, taking a 360-degree approach to supplier management, a best practice guide.
Thank you so much. I have taken a look at that report, and it is fantastic. I do encourage people to download that report. On your screen right now, you'll see a file transfer box. In just a moment, the title of this webinar deck will appear. You can click that and download it to your hard drive. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar with all of our registrants tomorrow by email. We encourage you to share this within your organization. This was a really valuable presentation. We really appreciate both Ardent Partners and Zycus, both Andrew and Richard presenting today. It was fantastic. I apologize, there were so many great questions, but we just didn't have the time. But I'm sure that Richard and Andrew are willing to follow up after the webinar with some of these questions.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. So to be true to our word about the hour webinar, I want to thank everyone for joining us today and hope you have a great day.